Hello. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to our first Axios House event of the day. I'm Ben Geman, energy reporter with Axios, and we're really excited that you could all join us for this really special edition of our News Shapers events. And a quick reminder for those following along on social media, please make sure to use the hashtag Axios House. Now, we've got an unbelievable lineup both today and tomorrow. Later today, we'll hear from Amazon Chief Sustainability Officer Kara Hurst, Delta Chief Sustainability Officer Amelia DeLuca, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, and Rockefeller Foundation President Dr. Rajiv Shah, and so many more as well. And then tomorrow morning, it's going to be amazing as well. Tomorrow morning, we're hosting a live viewing of President Biden's UN address. And after that, we're going to have a live in-person analysis right afterward, and it's going to be really sharp. And then this one's great too. Tomorrow afternoon, girls education activist and Malala Fund co-founder Malala Yousafzai will be joining us too. But now let's get back to this morning. And let's get this party started. Our first guest joining me on stage is someone who kind of needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. It is former Secretary of State John Kerry.
Wow. You all managed to get up.
So yeah, let's, okay. So, Mr. Secretary, my highly placed sources are telling me that there's an election that's going to happen very soon. And so, yeah, I often hear two things about the upcoming election. One is that momentum behind the energy transition is unstoppable. The other thing at the same time that I hear is that this is the most important climate election ever. How can both of these things be true at the same time? Can you square that circle for me?
Because they are true. But look, we are in as serious a mode as I can think of with respect to climate. And unfortunately, because of Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan and a host of other things, people are having a lot of trouble, I think, in sort of selecting what do you do, where do you go, how are we going to change this? Well, obviously, there's an election in 6 weeks with a massive differential in the outcome because one person wants to pull out of Paris and go backwards and defund and do all the things that happened for, years ago, 4 years ago, 8 years ago. And the other wants to continue the momentum that she has actually helped create with respect to where we are. But look, I've been doing this for a long time. You have Al Gore coming on, my classmate. We went to the Senate at the same time together. And he obviously has done an enormous amount to get people to understand how serious this is. Let me just give you an example. Yesterday, there were big stories in the papers about people doing tourism to go see the last of the glaciers. And from 1970 until 2014, the warming of the glaciers was linear. It was about 1.18 centigrade per year. Now, since 2014 till now, it's at 0.28 per year. And most recently, the best scientists in the world, a group of scientists who've been involved studying the Antarctic for years, all concluded and put out that the Thwaite Glacier, which is the fundamental glacier that holds back the West Antarctic ice sheet, is now possibly going to fall apart in the next 5 years. And you could have this massive speed up in the rate at which we're seeing sea level rise, which is already rising faster than people predicted. The bottom line to what I'm saying is this. We made an agreement in Dubai that we were going to transition away from fossil fuel. We're going to do it speeding up in this decade. We're going to do it so we reach net zero 2050. And according to the science, which means you try to hold the Earth's temperature increase at 1.5 degrees. Problem? We're not doing that. We're not implementing. And there's a massive movement in the fossil fuel industry now to sort of suggest, well, gas is going to be green and gas is going to be the future. But gas is 87% methane.
Yeah.
And methane is 20 to 80 times more damaging than CO2. So we need to speed up. We must come to scale faster. We need more money dedicated to the new technologies. And if we just deployed technologies that we actually have today, solar, wind, geothermal, so forth, we would be able to meet our goal of 2030. But currently we're not. And the implications for everybody, for life itself on the planet, are gigantic.
That actually dovetails nicely with the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is that we're hearing so much about fracking in this election cycle. And of course, Kamala Harris has changed the position that she had in 2019. Given your comments, do you see U.S. natural gas production as an ally in the fight against climate change or an enemy in the fight against climate change?
Well, I try not to categorize it as either, but the fact is that gas is about 30 to 50% cleaner than oil or coal. Mm-hmm. So the minute you are transitioning away from coal or away from oil, if that's what you're doing on a temporary basis, great, that's better. But if you're looking at it, and what happens is, you're talking about billions of dollars of investment, if you're investing in major new infrastructure that is going to produce new gas, that's going to be there for 30 or 40 years. And you're either going to wind up with stranded assets because the market is going to move to a different place, which is already beginning to happen, or you're going to have much more emissions being added to an already growing amount of emissions. Look, the reality is that all of the things that President Biden and Kamala Harris have been trying to do are not based on ideology. They're not political. They're not labeled Democrat, Republican. It's what science, mathematics, physics, some biology, and some chemistry are telling us we have to do. And we've agreed in Glasgow, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Dubai, that we are going to do X, Y, and Z in order to win this battle. But I have to tell you, all around the world, people are falling short or not even trying. And the fact is that good things are happening. We're making progress on batteries and on storage. We're making unbelievable progress on solar and on wind. Solar is now 90% cheaper than it was in 2009. And the price is not just competitive, it destroys the choice of doing either gas or these other efforts. So we could move much more rapidly. Last year, for the first time, and I take hope from this, $2 trillion of venture capital went into clean energy. $1 trillion went into fossil fuels. So it's the first time in history that clean energy has actually out-invested fossil fuel. I think that's going to continue. And in my judgment, it's not will we get to a low-carbon, no-carbon economy. It's will we get there in time to avoid the worst consequences of the crisis. And right now, we're not doing it. We have to come up to speed. We have to come up to scale so that we can deploy these technologies on a global basis.
You mentioned Ukraine earlier, and shortly after that, you mentioned what the science is telling us. It's very difficult to untether energy policy decisions from geopolitics. Sort of given that, in your view, and also given the kind of geopolitical leverage that U.S. LNG has provided the country, should the Biden administration resume approving U.S. LNG exports?
I don't think we need to be doing that if we are actually on a track. If it were part of a very clear, accepted ramping down and transitioning away, and you were to say, hey, this is what we have to do to not destroy our economies, and this is what we have to do to be on the track we want to be on, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But if it's just give us the permit, we're going to go out and do more LNG because there's demand for it, the demand is crushing us right now, and we can't be driven solely by that demand. I mean, look at the AI data centers that are going to be coming along. It is critical that we make sure that the energy provided for those is clean, comes from renewables, is circular, and so forth. It isn't clear that's happening yet. Yeah. So I think people are not yet serious enough about the consequences of not doing what we need to do. We already have about 30 million people migrating as a consequence solely of climate. We could have the implosion of the African food capacity, and you will have tens of millions of people. And this is accepted as to what the consequences would be as a matter of science and sort of mapping of human behavior. You will have people knocking on the door of Europe, Asia to some degree, though they have some of these problems, Canada, et cetera. You're going to see massive efforts by people who say, wait a minute, what's going on here? 48 sub-Saharan African countries equals 0.55% of all the emissions in the world. 20 countries, led by China, the United States, run the list of developed countries, are responsible for almost 80% of all the emissions. So there's an anger building in the global south, which is completely understandable. And we, a $28 trillion economy, and China, an $18 trillion economy, are 47% or so of the problem, and not doing anywhere near our share of getting ahead of the curve. The consequences globally and also for the United States in terms of relationships with people around the world is going to be staggering.
I'm glad you mentioned China, actually. One of the kind of fascinating things we're seeing unfold in U.S. policymaking right now is perhaps this tension between U.S. climate policy and U.S. industrial policy. And nowhere is that more evident than these 100% tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles. In your view, is it wise to erect very high barriers to the import of Chinese clean technology into the U.S.?
Well, it doesn't work. It's not ultimately going to make the difference. One thing China does, they had a car that was coming in at $22,500, a very good car. We put 100% tariff on it, they'll lower the price. And they'll subsidize the lowering of the price, which is what they did with their industry. Germany and the United States created the solar industry way back in 1970s and 80s and so forth. But we sat there while China broke the rules and went ahead and dumped. But now China is the producer and deployer of more renewable energy than all the rest of the world put together.
Yeah.
They are selling 90% of all the panels, and they've cornered that market. So we have a real challenge to sort of come together and do the things we know how to do. I liken it, at the end of World War II, when we had to figure out how we were going to take control of the seas, how we were going to take control of the air. We were producing, at the end of the war, one B-24 bomber every hour on the hour from a converted automobile factory in Michigan, Liberty Factory. We were producing three equivalent of what today's container ship is, the Liberty ships, that took the goods over for people to be able to accomplish the goals. And guess what? 3 Liberty ships every 2 days. We should be creating such an incentive beyond the IRA. The Inflation Reduction Act is a huge, great, important beginning, and it's had a profound impact. New battery companies, major new solar deployments and so forth, because it is providing a tax credit. It is an incentive. We need incentives like that that will create new supply chains and a radical transformation of the rate at which we are addressing this crisis, which again, I repeat, is not something dreamt up by one party or another. It began, Al Gore, who's coming on shortly, was part of the hearing with Jim Hansen back in 1988. And then in 1992, we all went to Rio. And meeting after meeting, we're now at COP29. We've got to get our act together and stop, sort of meeting and doing.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Obviously, COP29 is just, less than a couple months away now. We're approaching 10 years after the Paris Agreement. Is the COP system still fit for purpose, or does it need a sort of radical reshaping or overhauling in any respect?
I think it needs some reshaping, and I think it needs to move very rapidly, but it's going to. But the same problems that have produced outcomes that people aren't satisfied with are the same problems that are going to make getting that transformation very difficult.
How would you reshape it?
What you need now, I think, is leadership among the most the biggest emitter nations. We put together something, though, the Major Emitters Forum. And President Biden held 3 summits. At the first summit, we had President Xi, we had President Putin, it was pre-Ukraine, and people were serious. And we did raise global ambition in Glasgow. The what's called the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are each country's plans for reducing emissions. Those were reinforced. And we started sort of down a road. Sharm el-Sheikh was, frankly, a little less productive. Mm-hmm. But in Dubai, almost 200 nations agreed to the following. We will transition away from fossil fuel in a way that is fair, equitable, and orderly. We will do it accelerating in this decade, and we will do it so we reach net zero 2050, according to the science. And according to the science means holding the Earth's temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. So we have the mandate. We know what we have to do. All the companies know what we have to do, the big oil producers, et cetera, and they're just plowing ahead like it's business as usual and there's no differential. And the plan for actually really transitioning at the rate we need to is just not fully defined or actually embraced.
So what's a kind of either rule change or procedural change that you think would help improve the COP process?
I think I'm not convinced that you can change that process. Multilateral diplomacy is the hardest diplomacy there is.
Yeah.
And when you have consensus decisions, which is what you have, one nation can get up and say, I'm walking out, that's it. And you don't have consensus. So you don't have a global decision. That's what governed Paris. That's why Paris wound up letting each country make up its own plan, and nobody would accept a sort of a mandate structure. And in Kyoto, we had the same problem where we weren't able to succeed. The Senate just said, no way, and it was dead before it even began to be debated. So we have to get the largest nations, the largest economies, led by the United States. Look, we're at 28 trillion. You know, the next I said is China at 18. You know what the next is? Germany at about 4. And Japan a little over 4. So the differential in what we could do is just enormous. And I think, you know, we have to hope that the outcome on November 5th is what it needs to be for this issue and for others, and that we then can really put on the table the kinds of choices that the people of the world, not just America, that everybody needs and deserves.
You briefly mentioned the oil industry and what it is and is not doing. On a letter grade scale, and we don't give out incompletes here at Axios College. So on a letter grade scale, how is the oil industry doing on energy transition?
I can't get into letters on that. I mean, I'm not sure. Is there anything underneath the Z? Look, they're doing some things, but they are things that are not going to make the difference. There's that, and some people call it greenwashing, some people call it other things. It's just not having the impact it needs. And there are serious doubts among the best minds. Go to MIT, Stanford, various places. Listen to them talk about the potential for scaling and affordability of carbon capture, storage, and utilization. They will tell you, we don't think it's possible. It's not going to happen. So we're spending huge amounts of money chasing things that are sort of placebo. I mean, they go say to people, oh, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. Can you do direct air carbon capture in a locality where you can also put it in the ground right there? Sure. Are there places we do it today? For years, the oil industry has used carbon dioxide, which has been stored, to do what's called enhanced oil production. They use it to push the oil up to the surface. But anybody I've talked to has the deepest doubts about the ability to be able to get to scale and make it affordable so it's competitive with the things we already know how to do, for which we already have the technologies. Look at, Germany right now. Germany had to go cold turkey because of what Putin did with gas, right? And Ukraine. So, you know, some people will argue that they may have gone too far with respect to taking their nuclear power offline, and they now buy nuclear power from France to make up for it. You know, go figure. But what's happened is that me? I have to get up.
No, we're okay.
I have to wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Germany is already at about 50% deployment of renewables. Think about that. Yeah. And they're balancing it. They use wind from the North Sea. Mm-hmm. They're using, they've kept some coal open, very little amount, as a hedge against their economy imploding.
Yep.
But they're basically proving you can get to the very high levels of renewables. We're nowhere near that.
Yeah.
We're barely in the double digits. I mean, we're really just struggling along. And other countries that need to be doing better. And as I just said a moment ago, China, although it's it's 30% of all the emissions of the planet. We're about 10 or 11 or somewhere in there. But the fact is that China is deploying massive amounts of renewable, and it will change their peaking date. It will change their level of emissions over time.
Yeah.
If we could accelerate like that in more serious ways here, we could win. We can win this. I think if you ask Al Gore, myself, others, this is winnable. It's not as if we're facing a challenge for which we need an entire new discovery of a logarithm or some rocket scientist has to come in and say, here it is, X, Y, whatever. No. We know this is the simplest of all major global challenges we face. We are burning fossil fuel in order to propel our vehicles, heat our homes, light our factories and businesses, and we don't capture the emissions. And unless somebody can prove we're going to, we have to choose alternatives and deploy them now.
Thank you. We're running short on time. Last question for you. It's from one Massachusetts native to another. Just real quick, what are a couple ways in which Massachusetts is just so much more awesome than New York and D.C.?
Well, because we understand the meaning of wicked awesome. And, you have to have that touch, the Red Sox. Hard to mention the Patriots today, but we are, even Al Gore was educated there, so it's good.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much.
Thank you.